Quality or quantity at the Giants wide receiver position? That's what we're going to explore on this episode of the LockedOn Giants podcast, coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I am Patricia Traina, and we are getting you ready for New York Giants training camp. The rookies report on Tuesday, the veterans report a week from Tuesday. It is almost here, folks, and we are getting you ready. We are excited here at the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you are as well. We got a lot of coverage coming up once things get underway at training camp. So as I said, we're going to get you ready for training camp. We are taking a look at every Giants position group. We're doing a little preview to kind of give you where things are at, where they need to be, and so on and so forth. Today, we're going to take a look at the wide receivers, quality or quantity. We're going to try and answer that question. So before we get into it, again, happy to have you with us. And thank you for making us your first listen of the day or your first watch of the day if watching at YouTube. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at the Giants receiver group. Now, the Giants have roughly a dozen plus receivers that come in all shapes, all sizes. They have different experience levels. They have guys who can play different positions. When I look at this Giants wide receiver group, my initial impression is they have what they need. And by that, I mean, they have a big X receiver. They have slot guys. They have guys that can be versatile enough to play inside or outside. They have guys that can run the ball if they need to, on those jet sweeps or end arounds. They have a variety of guys to do different things in the offense. But it becomes a question of, do they have the quality to do that? And here's where things get a little sticky for this wide receiver group. Although the Giants have what they need in terms of different skill sets, different guys that can do different things within this offense, what they have is a bunch of guys who are, shall we say, injury issues. So, for example, we look at this past spring, and the Giants' top three receivers, or projected top three receivers, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, and Sterling Shepard, were not able to participate because each one of them was dealing with some kind of physical ailment. Now, from what I gather, of those three, Sterling Shepard might not be ready to start training camp. He might just start camp on the PUP list. But Golladay and Toney, who had the offseason knee surgery, those two guys are expected to be ready. The question is can they stay healthy? We talk about the Giants having what they need at the top of the receiver depth chart. But what good is it if they don't stay healthy? And that, to me, is the biggest problem, the biggest concern I have about the New York Giants receiver group. It's not that they don't have talent. They do. But do they have guys that can stay healthy and stay on the field? They proved that they didn't have that last year, and it hurt the passing game. I don't think Daniel Jones had the same receiving core 2 weeks in a row, which was really difficult for him, because you can't build up that chemistry. You can't build up that camaraderie, that sense of timing. And I think that helped, or I should say, I think that hurt Daniel Jones and the passing game, amongst other reasons, of course. But that was a big one. So here's the other thing. So the Giants, they have all these guys that can do different things. And, throw in Wan'Dale Robinson, the second round draft pick. Let's not forget about Darius Slayton. I know people think he's on the bubble, but he's going to get a chance to compete. You're going to see guys like Colin Johnson. You're going to see guys like CJ Board, David Sills V, Alex Bachmann. These are all names that, were here last year or the year before that. So they have guys to choose from. And I don't know about you, but it kind of makes me a little squeamish to think that this receiver core might be built on who's healthy and who's not. I mean, ideally, you want your top guys. You want Galladay. You want Kadarius Toney. You would like to have Sterling Shepard. You would like to have Wan'Dale Robinson. Those would be your top 4 guys in any kind of order. But if they don't have those 4 guys, then you're kind of having a little bit of a drop off, even though these guys behind them can do, play the positions that the Giants need, slot receiver, outside receiver, and so on and so forth. There's a tiny bit of a drop off in the talent level. And, look, this is an offense. This receiving group is going to be so important because this offense is going to be a pass first offense. And if they don't have healthy bodies at receiver, folks, we're going to be in for a very, very long season. And, here's the other thing that I've mentioned before on the show. I believe that the Giants initially are going to lean a little bit more on the running game at first, just until that passing game is brought up to speed. But I also think that the Giants aren't going to waste a whole lot of time, that they're going to get that passing game going as quickly as possible. But, if they want to have that potent type of passing offense, they need these guys on the field. And Galladay has shown that, at least in his 1 year with the Giants, can't stay on the field. Toney had all kinds of issues, couldn't stay on the field. I know people don't want to rehash the past, but former GM Dave Gettleman used to say, injured guys are going to get injured. And we saw that with these guys. Sterling Shepard's another one who got injured. And my gosh, if the injury bug bites this receiver group at its heart, then all plans for this offense, I think you're going to have to, possibly scrap them or maybe, alter them, I should say. Now, Saquon Barkley is going to be part of that receiving group, but he's technically a running back. We covered running backs earlier in the week, but, this receiving group, really the biggest concern I have is not so much, do they have what they need, but can these guys stay healthy? And we know, given this team's history with injuries, that is a big if. All right. Coming up next, what are they doing with the receiving group? How are things going to be different? What is the plan? We're going to talk about that right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head on over to BetOnline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the games start. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, getting you ready for New York Giants training camp. It is coming soon. July 26th is when the entire team will report. The rookies are in on the 19th. The entire team comes in on the 26th. First practice is the 27th. First padded practice is scheduled for August 1st. And my understanding is the Giants have already made tickets available to those training camp practices. So if you're planning on going, you probably want to get over to Giants.com and reserve your tickets for the training camp practices. FanFest, I don't think is up yet. I think that comes out Monday. But, if you're planning on going and you want to see the team, don't wait. So, all right, we are talking Giants receivers. And I want to talk now a little bit about the plan. I mentioned in the last segment, the Giants have probably a little bit of everything. They've got receivers in different shapes, sizes, skill sets, production levels, experience, and so on and so forth. So what is the plan? What should we be looking for, especially as the competition plays out for the backup roles and the potential practice squad roles? Well, based on the offense that we saw in the springtime, the main objective, it looks like, is going to be that the Giants are going to want to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly into the hands of the playmakers so that they can go and pick up the yardage. So receivers who can separate, receivers who can rack up the yards after the catch, those are going to be the guys you want to keep an eye on. Now, in the springtime, remember, there's no hitting. There's no contact. So it's kind of hard to see how a guy reacts to, bump and run and all that stuff. But that's something I'm going to be looking at, is which guys are going to be able to separate, who's going to be able to, use their body to shield the ball from a defender, who's going to be able to, pick up the yards after the catch. Yards after the catch was a problem for the Giants last year. They didn't really get a whole lot. And, which was kind of surprising. But again, I chalk that up to injuries and some of the guys that they had to plug in there when guys were missing at the top of the depth chart. So there is a plan for the receiving corps. They are going to try and get them, some of these short and intermediate passes. They're going to work outside the numbers. We saw a lot of passes in the spring go outside the numbers as opposed to in the middle of the field. We're going to see some select deep shots. So this is where you're going to want your deep targets. This is where you're going to want to have some of your guys who can win the jump balls. The Giants have that. Kenny Golladay, that's something he does very well, win the jump ball. He didn't do it so well last year, but again, how much of that was due to injury? So these are some of the things we're going to be looking for with this Giants receiving core. They're going to really be, instrumental, because as I said, this is going to be a pass first offense. And this Giants team, it's been a while since they've kind of, been able to execute that. I know in the past they've tried to do that with no success, but that seems to be the plan. It's going to be not so much a running offense like in the 80s and the 90s when, it was all about the power rushing game. The NFL has changed. And, we talk about the plan for the receivers. Obviously, we've got to mention the quarterback, even though I talked about the quarterback at the beginning of the week. The quarterback's going to have to build up the chemistry, get the ball into the hands of these guys. There is optimism that Daniel Jones is going to work out. But we need to see it. We need to see it. All too often last year, there were miscommunications. And usually they say when there's a miscommunication between a quarterback and a receiver, usually people say, oh, it's the receiver's fault. Last year, it was kind of hard to tell whose fault it was. I mean, some cases you could tell if it was the quarterback or the receiver with the miscommunication. But that's another thing the Giants are going to want to cut down on. There were way too many passes that were thrown that were nearly picked off or were picked off. And whether that was just a matter of the timing being off, the communication not being there, whatever the case may be, the Giants can't have that. And, experience is going to be key, but most importantly, camaraderie. Now, Daniel Jones recently worked with a group of receivers down in, I believe, Charlotte, where Daniel's family lives. So we'll see if that chemistry, if that camaraderie is a little bit more advanced, because usually when the team takes the field in the beginning part of training camp, it's very sloppy for the offense, especially for the passing game. So we'll see if they've improved that, if they hit the ground running. That's basically what I think the coaching staff had hoped to do, was hit the ground running with that passing game so that they don't have to build up the timing and the camaraderie and stuff like that. But that's something I'm going to be watching, because last year I took note of the fact that while, the Giants were doing special teams drills, for example, Daniel Jones was off on the side throwing to some of his receivers just to build that up. And they were running, pseudo routes and whatnot. So that's going to be important. And I'll be looking to see if they do that again this summer. All right. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the depth at the position. So stick around. We'll be right back. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars contain about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, and they taste great. Built Bar offers 9 amazing flavors in nut and nut-free variety, plus a rotating limited time offering of different flavors that changes up every so many weeks. They also have granola products. They have their delicious Built Puffs, which are like a marshmallow treat. Really good. They have different flavors, like I said, that rotate every week. You want to head on over to built.com, check out their current lineup, and use our special promo code LOCKED15 to save 15% off your first order. Again, that code is LOCKED15, LOCKED15 for 15% off at builtbar.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. We're getting you ready for New York Giants training camp which officially begins July 26th, first practice July 27th. We're almost there, folks. Just a few more days. Hang in there, and then all the excitement is going to begin. All right. We are talking wide receivers, quality or quantity. And that's really the question. And I would say if I had to answer that question, I would say at this point, quantity, because we're not quite sure what they have in terms of quality. And that's because of the health factor and some of the depth lower down on the roster. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the guys who are going to be competing for some of that depth. You have Alex Bachmann, who's been with the team now on the practice squad mostly, I want to say for at least a couple of years. Okay, you have CJ Board, who really made his name on special teams. And speaking of special teams, that's going to be a big factor in sorting out the bottom of the depth chart. I think, again, the top three, if I had to, stack this up right now, Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, those three are locks. Receivers 4, 5, and 6. I do think they're going to keep 6. That's an early, projection. Sterling Shepard, I think, stays on PUP to start the season. He's coming off of that Achilles injury, although he's been working hard to get back. And, there's a chance he could come back off of PUP. But I do think that's where he's going to start. But anyway, receivers 4, 5, and 6, they have to contribute on special teams. Darius Slayton, that's a guy that a lot of people think is going to be, cast aside because he has a $2.5 million cap hit, doesn't participate on special teams. And at best, he would be the number 4 receiver on this Giants team, which, you can't carry a guy for $2.5 million that doesn't play special teams. But that said, if your injured guys aren't healthy, do you really want to get rid of Darius Slayton? I'm not so sure you want to. Yes, I know the money is a big deal, but it's counted for. It's accounted for anyway. So, and to me, I don't think the Giants are going to necessarily need that money because there's going to be other cuts that are made that will give the Giants some more cap relief as the final roster cuts are made as we get to 53. So I'm not so sure if Darius Slayton is an automatic cut. I could see him sticking around, like I said, until maybe Sterling Shepard's ready to come back. I know they play different positions. Slayton's not really a slot guy, but he did do some work in the slot in the spring. But he and Shepard are kind of like, they can both play inside and outside, but Slayton more so on the outside, whereas Shepard, I think, is better in the slot. All right. The Giants added this guy's Keelan Doss, who was with them in the spring, had a tryout during the mini camp. And it's too soon for me to say anything about him because he came in and it was like, you only saw a couple practices worth with him. You have Robert Foster, who is a speedster. I think in terms of John Ross, but a healthier John Ross. That's what Robert Foster reminds me of. 6'2", 196 pounds. Roster long shot, I think, good size. And, speaking of size, I'm looking at the receivers that the Giants have. CJ Board 6'1", Keelan Doss is 6'3", Foster 6'2", Kenny Golladay 6'4", Colin Johnson is listed as 6'6". David Sills is 6'3", Slayton 6'1", Travis Toivonen 6'4". They've got some big guys this year, which is, I don't know if you noticed or not, in the past, the Giants had a lot of guys who were like 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot with cleats on. They've got some legitimate size. So, in addition to adding talent to the receiver core, they added size, which has been missing from this offense for quite some time. So, but anyway, let me get back to some of these other guys that are on the roster. Richie James, 5'9", he's a return specialist, guy who can play in the slot. Let's see, I mentioned Colin Johnson. Austin Prohl is another guy. He's the son of Ricky Prohl, former NFL receiver from years ago. 5'10", probably more of a slot guy. David Sills, we all know about David Sills. He was a fan favorite a couple of years ago, and even last year, he's been hanging around trying to make his way onto the roster, the bottom of the roster, but thus far hasn't had much luck. Travis Toivonen, got a lot of snaps in the spring until he was shut down for some reason. I think he had some kind of an injury tweak or something. But again, 6'4", 212 pounds, a very physical receiver. And I'm very curious to see what he brings to the table if he's healthy. So, you have, and then of course there's Kadarius Toney. Let's not forget him, but he's already a lock. You have a wide mix. You have a lot of tall guys, and you kind of get the impression that if the Giants are going to run the deep ball a little bit more often than they have in the past, they're going to want these bigger physical pass targets for Daniel Jones to try and reach. Now, we're talking the bottom of the depth chart. I don't know necessarily how much receivers 4 through 6 would get in terms of snaps during the game, let alone targets. But you've got to have the depth because, as I said, with this group at the top of the depth chart, injuries and health is a concern. And you'd like to think that this group is going to be healthy, but you can't put that in stone, folks. And that goes for any position. So the bottom part of the receiver depth chart and how that shakes out to me is going to be just as interesting as anything, because those are the guys that are going to have to step up and fill the roles if there are injuries. So how's it going to play out? Well, we will find out soon enough. As I've been saying all along, it's coming and we will bring it to you. So that's going to do it for us on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube your first watch of the day. We will be back next week. Our summer schedule is over, although this week we did 5 shows. So I ended the schedule a week early because that's how excited I am to get back to you. But anyway, next week, for sure, summer schedule is over. 5 days a week, Locked On Giants, from now right through till next June, really. So hope to see you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.